What are you doing in this neighborhood? The words slice through the Sunday morning air like a blade. A gun barrel catches the sunlight, pointed directly at a man in a crimson shirt holding a newspaper. Marcus Williams doesn't flinch. Steam rises from his coffee cup. He lowers the paper slowly, hands visible, palms open. I'm reading the news on my own porch. Officer Derek Mason's finger tightens on the trigger. His hand trembles. The radio on his belt crackles with static. Derek doesn't know it yet. He just made the biggest mistake of his life. Drop the paper. Hands where I can see them now. The command cuts through the Sunday morning silence. A gun barrel gleams in the sunlight, aimed at a man sitting peacefully on his porch. Marcus Williams doesn't move. His coffee cup sits untouched, steam still rising. He slowly lowers the newspaper, hands visible, palms open. I'm just reading on my own porch. Officer Derek Mason's finger moves closer to the trigger. His hand trembles slightly. The radio on his belt crackles. Derek doesn't know it yet. He just made the biggest mistake of his life. 3 hours earlier, the morning sun in Maple Grove had a quality of liquid gold. It spilled over manicured lawns and glistened on the hoods of expensive cars parked in wide, clean driveways. On the porch of a newly purchased colonial-style home, FBI Special Agent Marcus Williams was savoring that peace. He wore comfortable linen pants and a soft crimson shirt. A steaming mug of dark roast coffee sat on the wicker table beside him, its aroma mingling with the sweet scent of blooming gardenias. The Sunday paper was spread across his lap, its rustle the only sound breaking the serene morning hum. He had been in this house for exactly 1 week, a fortress of solitude earned after 12 years in the chaotic shadows of federal law enforcement. Here, he wasn't Agent Williams. He was just Marcus, a man enjoying the silence. That silence shattered with the guttural roar of an engine, followed by the sharp squeal of tires. A black and white police cruiser screeched to a halt directly in front of his property, its tires biting into the pristine asphalt. It sat there idling, a predator that had just scented prey. The driver's side door swung open. Officer Derek Mason emerged. Mason was a man built of solid, resentful flesh. His uniform stretched taut across a barrel chest and a burgeoning gut. His face was a roadmap of grievances, with pale, cold eyes that scanned Marcus's property not with duty, but with a palpable sneer. The crimson shirt, the grand house, the relaxed posture. Each detail seemed to be a personal affront to him. He slammed the car door and strode onto the lawn, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered firearm. Marcus didn't move. He kept his eyes on the newspaper. His body language relaxed, but every nerve ending was on high alert. His training had forged an unbreakable calm in him, a sheath of ice over a core of coiled steel. He had faced down cartel leaders and terrorists. A local cop with a chip on his shoulder was just another variable to be managed. Mason stopped at the foot of the porch steps, his shadow falling over Marcus like a shroud. "You live here?" The question was an accusation. Marcus slowly lowered the paper, his eyes meeting Mason's. They were calm, steady, betraying nothing. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem?" Mason's lip curled. "I'll ask the questions. I asked if you live here." The venom in his tone was unmistakable. It wasn't about a potential crime. It was about Marcus's very presence in this neighborhood. "Yes, I do," Marcus replied, his voice even. "I just moved in." "I see," Mason grunted, his gaze flicking contemptuously over the silk shirt. "Lot of robberies in the area lately, people casing houses looking for opportunities." The implication was as thick as mud. "You don't belong here. You must be a threat." "Officer," Marcus said, the calm in his voice, a stark contrast to Mason's coiled aggression. "Is reading my paper against the law in Maple Grove?" A flicker of rage crossed Mason's face. He hated being challenged, especially by someone who looked like Marcus. "I'm going to need to see some ID." Marcus didn't move. He knew his rights. He was on his own property, not suspected of any crime. Providing ID was not required. It was a submission to an illegal demand. "I don't think that's necessary," he said politely. "I'm not doing anything wrong." That was the spark. Mason's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. The quiet defiance, the refusal to cower was more than he could tolerate. "You think you're smart?" he snarled, taking a step up onto the porch. "You think you're above the law?" His hand unsnapped the holster. "I said, I need to see your ID now." Marcus slowly folded his newspaper and placed it on the table. He raised his hands slightly, palms open, a gesture of non-aggression. "Officer, you're escalating a situation for no reason." "I'm escalating?" Mason's voice cracked with fury. In a flash of movement that was terrifyingly fast, he drew his weapon. The black steel of the Glock gleamed in the golden sunlight, a stark instrument of death in a place of peace. He pointed it directly at Marcus's chest. "Drop the paper. Hands where I can see them now." Time stopped. The barrel of the Glock was an unblinking eye, a black hole threatening to swallow the tranquil morning whole. Marcus Williams's heart rate was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat, a testament to years of conditioning in hostile territories. Panic was a luxury he could not afford. It was the currency of the victim, and he was anything but. He stared past the gun and into Mason's eyes, seeing not a guardian of peace, but a man drowning in his own prejudice, flailing with a weapon. "All right," Marcus said, his voice a low, steady baritone that cut through the tension. He slowly raised his hands higher, keeping them open and visible. "No sudden moves. You're in charge." He gave Mason the illusion of control, a verbal offering to soothe the man's fragile ego. It was a de-escalation tactic, a way to disarm the man without touching the weapon. Mason's chest puffed out, the taste of dominance momentarily placating his rage. "Damn right I am," he grunted, the gun still fixed on Marcus. Marcus held his gaze. His mind was racing through 100 scenarios. He thought of the cases he'd investigated, the men and women who hadn't survived moments like this. Black bodies on porches, in cars, in parks, dead because someone with a badge saw threat instead of humanity. One wrong move, just one. The sun felt too bright, the air too thick. He could hear his own breathing, measured and controlled. He could hear Mason's, rapid and shallow. Sweat beaded on Marcus's temple. A single drop rolled down, but he didn't wipe it away. Any movement could be misinterpreted. Any twitch could be fatal. "Now the ID," Mason barked. "Slowly," Marcus calculated. "It's in my wallet, inside the house on the kitchen counter." He would not give Mason the satisfaction of producing an ID from his pocket, of validating this illegal stop. By making the officer wait, by forcing him to consider the next step, Marcus was subtly reclaiming control of the tempo. He was turning Mason's aggression into a procedural problem. A tense silence stretched. Mason's finger was still on the trigger, but a flicker of uncertainty entered his eyes. From the street, Mason's partner, a younger officer named Jamie Torres, took a hesitant step forward. "Derek, maybe we just run the plates on his car. He said he lives here. Let's just back off." The suggestion was sensible. A lifeline thrown to a man about to make a career-ending mistake. Mason shot a venomous glare at his partner. "You questioning my command, Torres?" But the interruption had broken the spell. The raw, unthinking rage was now mingled with the cold, creeping thought of consequences. Holding a man at gunpoint on his own porch for refusing to show ID was a mountain of paperwork at best, and a catastrophic lawsuit at worst. With a final, resentful snarl, Mason slowly lowered his weapon, though he did not holster it. "Fine," he spat at Marcus. "We'll be watching you. One wrong move." He backed off the porch, his eyes still locked on Marcus, and slid back into his cruiser. Torres gave Marcus a quick apologetic glance before hurrying to the passenger side. The cruiser peeled away with another squeal of tires, leaving a cloud of blue smoke and shattered peace in its wake. Marcus remained standing for a long moment, the adrenaline finally beginning to course through his veins. He took a slow, deep breath, then another. He didn't reach for his coffee. He didn't pick up his paper. He walked inside, his bare feet cool on the hardwood floors, and retrieved his phone from the kitchen counter where he'd said his wallet was. He didn't call his superior at the FBI. He didn't call the U.S. Attorney's office. He dialed 3 simple numbers, 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. 911. What's your emergency? Marcus's voice was equally calm, but freighted with precision. I'd like to report a police officer, badge number 3712. He has just left my property at 112 Maple Grove Drive. He drew his service weapon on me without cause while I was sitting on my own front porch. He was meticulous. He gave the time, the location, the officer's appearance, and a concise, factual account of the incident. He knew every word was being recorded, time-stamped, creating an official, undeniable record that would exist outside of Mason's control. It was the first stone laid in the foundation of his case. Miles away in his cruiser, Officer Derek Mason was already typing his report on the patrol car's laptop, his thick fingers stabbing at the keys. He was crafting a fiction, a narrative of self-preservation. Responded to reports of a suspicious individual in the Maple Grove area. Subject was non-compliant and verbally aggressive. His demeanor suggested a potential threat, forcing a defensive posture. Subject refused to identify himself. Cleared the scene without further incident. He omitted the gun. He omitted the fact that Marcus was on his own property reading a newspaper. He was building his side of the blue wall, brick by false brick. But he had no idea that a 911 call, a separate and immutable piece of data, was already being logged into a different system. A call that directly contradicted his report before the ink was even dry. The sun had climbed higher, its golden light now a harsh, interrogative glare. The tranquility of Marcus's morning was gone, replaced by the cold, familiar hum of a mission in progress. He stood in his spacious, sparsely furnished living room, the phone pressed to his ear. The 911 call had been the opening salvo, a public record. This call was different. This was activating the ghost in the machine. Jenkins! A sharp, no-nonsense female voice answered on the first ring. Sarah, it's Marcus, he said, his voice low. There was a pause on the other end. Then Sarah Jenkins's tone shifted from professional to concerned. Marcus, everything okay? You're supposed to be on leave. Don't tell me you found trouble already. Sarah was more than a colleague. She was his anchor within the Bureau's Civil Rights Division, a razor-sharp attorney who could dissect a legal code with the same precision Marcus used to dismantle a conspiracy. They had been partners in the trenches for years, a bond forged in the fires of high-stakes cases. Trouble found me, Marcus replied. He relayed the morning's events. He didn't embellish or editorialize. He presented the facts with the dispassionate clarity of a field report, the unprovoked stop, the demand for ID, the drawn weapon, the officer's badge number. He recounted it all, a cold chain of events. As she listened, Sarah was silent, but Marcus could practically hear the gears turning in her mind, the legal strategies already forming like storm clouds. When he finished, her voice was glacial. Badge 3712 Maple Grove PD, and you have a time-stamped 911 call. Filed it less than 10 minutes after the incident, Marcus confirmed. Beautiful, she breathed. That's clean. He can't wiggle out of the timeline. She was already moving. The sound of a keyboard clicking softly in the background. Derek Mason, 42 years old, 17 years on the force. Let's see what we have on him. A few moments of furious typing passed. Well, he's got a history. Several excessive force complaints, all dismissed internally. A couple of racial profiling accusations that were settled out of court by the city. The department has been protecting him. He's a known problem they've chosen to bury. He felt comfortable, Marcus said, the memory of Mason's smug face vivid in his mind. He felt untouchable. He drew his weapon on me like he was swatting a fly. Because in his world, he is untouchable, Sarah countered, her voice hardening. The local system is designed to protect men like him, which is why we won't be using the local system. The plan was already taking shape, an intricate web being spun from a secure office in Washington, D.C. I'm flagging this as a potential color of law violation. Section 242. We'll open a preliminary federal inquiry. It'll be quiet for now. No sirens, no flashing lights. We'll start with an official request for all relevant materials. Officer Mason's service record, all previous complaints against him, and most importantly, his and his partner's body camera and dash cam footage from this morning. Marcus knew the strategy. It was a classic FBI move. You don't storm the castle walls. You quietly demand the keys. You use the weight of federal authority to force the local institution to either comply or obstruct. Either choice would lead them deeper into the trap. They'll stall on the footage, Marcus predicted. They'll claim it was a malfunction, a glitch, a corrupted file. Let them, Sarah said, a hint of predatory satisfaction in her voice. Obstruction of a federal investigation is a much bigger fish to fry than one rogue cop's power trip. If they hide the evidence, they make themselves part of the conspiracy. The official request from the Department of Justice landed on the desk of Maple Grove Police Chief Roland Brody 2 days later. It wasn't delivered by a mail carrier. It was hand-delivered by a stoic FBI field agent in a crisp suit. A clear message that this was not a casual inquiry. The document was an artfully worded piece of legal weaponry, polite in tone but backed by the full force of federal law. It requested all records pertaining to Officer Derek Mason, and specifically the complete unedited audio and video recordings from his patrol unit for the morning of the incident. Chief Brody read it, then read it again. He was a political animal, a man who had navigated the treacherous currents of City Hall for 20 years. He knew this wasn't about a simple complaint. This was a federal shark circling his small municipal boat. He summoned Mason to his office. The door was closed, the blinds drawn. Mason swaggered in, still riding the high of his perceived victory on Marcus's porch. He read the request, and his bravado evaporated, replaced by a defensive scowl. "It's nothing," Miller blustered. "The guy was a mouthy punk. I put him in his place. He got scared and filed a complaint. It'll go nowhere." Brody leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled. He looked at Mason not as a subordinate, but as a liability. "He didn't just file a complaint, Derek. He triggered a federal inquiry. The feds don't get involved for a mouthy punk." "Who was this guy?" "I don't know," Mason grumbled. "Just some guy dressed like a clown in a silk shirt." The dismissal, the utter lack of curiosity about who he had threatened, was pure Mason. His prejudice was a blinder, preventing him from seeing the man, only the stereotype. Brody sighed. This was the problem with Mason. He was a blunt instrument, effective for intimidation but utterly lacking in finesse. He created messes that others had to clean up. "The footage," Brody said, his voice flat. "Is there anything on it we need to worry about?" Mason's eyes darted away for a fraction of a second, a flicker of guilt quickly masked by defiance. "The camera was acting up, glitching. The video file might be corrupted. You know how this old equipment is." It was the oldest lie in the book. The blue wall's first line of defense. A technical difficulty that conveniently erased evidence of misconduct. Brody knew it was a lie. Mason knew it was a lie. But it was the lie they had to tell. "Make sure it confirms that," Brody said, a clear order. "I want a full diagnostic report on your unit's equipment failure. Put it in writing." He was already building his own wall of plausible deniability. The official response went back to the DOJ the next day. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic evasion. The Maple Grove Police Department would of course cooperate fully. Officer Mason's service record was attached, the heavily redacted version. All other documents were being compiled. However, regrettably, due to an unforeseen and unfortunate technical malfunction with the recording equipment in Unit 37, the video and audio data for the specified time period was irretrievably corrupted. They expressed their deepest apologies for the inconvenience. In his home office, Marcus read the emailed response forwarded by Sarah. He didn't feel anger or frustration. He felt a grim sense of satisfaction. "The glitch," he said aloud to the empty room. "They took the bait." On the phone with Sarah moments later, her voice was cold and sharp. "They're stonewalling. Brody is protecting his man. He thinks he can wait us out, bury us in paperwork. He thinks we're playing his game." Marcus replied, "He doesn't realize we've already moved to a different board." "Exactly," Sarah said. "Their official claim of a technical glitch is now on record. I'm taking that official response, attaching it to a warrant application, and walking it over to a federal judge this afternoon. We're not requesting the footage anymore, Marcus. We're getting a warrant to seize the entire server it was stored on, along with every diagnostic report and maintenance log for the last 2 years." The strategy had shifted. The objective was no longer just the video of the incident itself. The objective was now the proof of the cover-up. By lying, Chief Brody and Officer Mason had turned a personnel problem into a federal crime. They thought they were erasing evidence. Instead, they were creating new evidence of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The federal government was no longer knocking on the door. It was preparing to kick the door down and seize the entire house. The federal warrant landed like a grenade in Chief Brody's office. FBI technicians, accompanied by federal marshals, arrived unannounced and began the systematic process of creating a forensic image of the police department's central server. The atmosphere in the precinct was thick with a mixture of fear and resentment. Officers whispered in hallways, their eyes darting toward the IT room as if it were contaminated. The blue wall was under siege from an outside force, and its foundations were shaking. The pressure was immense, but it was not being applied evenly. The primary target of this silent psychological warfare was not Mason or Brody, but the weakest link in the chain, Officer Jamie Torres. Torres had been a ghost since the incident. He was quiet during patrols, his gaze often distant. The memory of Mason drawing his gun, the sheer unnecessary violence of the act, had replayed in his mind 1,000 times. He had joined the force to be like the cops he saw on TV, heroes protecting the innocent. Instead, he found himself complicit in the casual cruelty of a bully with a badge. He knew Mason's report was a lie. He knew the body cam glitch was a lie. And every day he remained silent. He was a liar, too. The FBI's approach to him was subtle, almost imperceptible. It began with a visit to his home from 2 plainclothes agents. They weren't there to interrogate him. They were there to follow up on a routine inquiry. They were polite, professional, and their questions were ostensibly about department procedures and equipment maintenance. But the real message was delivered between the lines. "We know you were there. We know what happened. We are giving you a chance to be a witness instead of a target." A few days later, a sealed envelope from the U.S. Attorney's Office was delivered to his home. Inside was not a subpoena, but a proffer letter. It was a formal invitation to speak to federal investigators, outlining the terms of limited immunity. It was a lifeline and a threat all in one. It promised that his honest testimony would not be used against him. But the unspoken corollary was that remaining silent, continuing the cover-up, would make him part of a federal conspiracy charge, obstruction of justice, a felony that would end his career and could land him in a federal prison. Mason sensed the change in his partner. Torres was jumpy, avoiding his gaze. In the patrol car, the silence was heavy and suffocating. Miller tried to reinforce the wall. "You keep your mouth shut, you hear me?" He'd growl, his voice a low threat. "It's us against them. That's the only rule that matters. Don't you forget it." But the threats of a bitter, cornered man were beginning to sound hollow compared to the silent, immense pressure of the federal government. Mason could ruin his career in the department. The feds could take away his freedom. The breaking point came during a tense late-night conversation with his wife, Maria. She had seen the letter, the fear in his eyes. "What's going on, Jamie?" she pleaded. "You haven't been yourself for weeks." He finally confessed, the words spilling out in a torrent of guilt and anxiety. The porch, the gun, the lies, the federal agents. Maria listened, her face pale. She was a school teacher, a woman who lived in a world of right and wrong, of clear moral lines. "This man Mason," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "He's a cancer, and if you protect him, you let the sickness spread to you, to us. What will you tell our son when he's old enough to ask what you did? That you helped a bully hide his crimes?" Her words were a mirror, reflecting an image of himself that he could no longer stand to see. A coward, a liar, an accomplice. He saw the path Mason was leading him down, a dead-end road of compromised integrity, ending in a prison cell or a lifetime of looking over his shoulder. And he saw the other path, the one offered by the feds. It was a terrifying path, a betrayal of the code he had sworn to uphold. But it was the only path that led back to the man he wanted to be. That night, sitting at his kitchen table with his wife's hand on his, Officer Jamie Torres made a choice. He picked up his phone and dialed the number on the card the FBI agents had left him. He was done protecting Derek Mason. He was going to save himself. The blue wall of silence was about to be shattered by the very man who was supposed to help build it. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a drab, anonymous conference room in a budget hotel near the airport. It was a place for transients, for secrets, for conversations that needed no echo. Officer Torres arrived looking pale and sleep-deprived, his civilian clothes doing little to disguise the rigid posture of a cop. Waiting for him were Sarah Jenkins and an impassive senior FBI agent. There were no bright lights, no intimidation tactics, just a bottle of water, a legal pad, and the heavy weight of the truth. Sarah began, her voice calm and reassuring. "Officer Torres, thank you for coming. We know this is difficult. We just want to hear your account of what happened, the truth, in your own words." Torres took a deep breath. His hands clasped so tightly on the table that his knuckles were white. And then he began to speak. The carefully constructed wall of lies crumbled, and the story poured out, raw and unvarnished. He described the tranquil morning, the way Mason had targeted the house, the contempt in his voice from the very first word. He recounted the illegal demand for ID, Marcus's calm refusal, and the sudden, terrifying explosion of Mason's rage. "He just snapped," Torres said, his voice barely a whisper. "There was no threat. The man was just sitting there. But Mason, he looked at him, and he saw something that made him hate. He pulled his weapon. I thought he was going to shoot him right there on his own porch. Over nothing." He didn't stop there. Sarah gently prodded, asking about what happened after, about the report Mason filed. "It was a work of fiction," Torres admitted, shame coloring his words. "He told me to back his play. He said the camera had glitched. He logged it in the system that way. It was a direct order to falsify a report." This confession alone was devastating, a direct contradiction to the official police narrative and proof of a cover-up. But Sarah knew there was more. She had seen Mason's file. "Jamie," she said, using his first name to build a fragile bridge of trust, "has this happened before? Have you seen Officer Mason behave this aggressively with other citizens?" Torres hesitated. This was the true betrayal, the crossing of the Rubicon. It wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about exposing a pattern, about burning a fellow officer completely. He looked at Sarah's steady, waiting eyes, thought of his wife's words, and the dam broke. "Yes," he said, the word heavy with finality. "Several times. There was a traffic stop a few months back, a Hispanic family. Mason claimed the driver was acting erratically. He pulled the father out of the car, slammed him against the hood in front of his kids, all because the man questioned why he was pulled over. The complaint was buried. Another time, a group of black teenagers at the park. He called them a gang, searched them without cause. It's a pattern. If someone doesn't look the way he thinks they should, or if they don't show him what he considers proper respect, he goes after them. The department knows. They just call it proactive policing. They move him around, pay off the lawsuits, and keep him on the street. He spoke for nearly 2 hours. Each story was a nail in Derek Mason's coffin. He wasn't just describing an officer who had a bad day. He was painting a portrait of a predator who used his badge as a shield for his bigotry. He was exposing the rot at the core of the department, the systemic failure that allowed a man like Mason to operate with impunity for years. When he was finished, the room was silent. Torres looked drained, as if a physical weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Sarah slid a document across the table. It was a sworn affidavit, a summary of his testimony. "Read this carefully," she said. "If it's accurate, sign it. Once you do, you become a federal witness. We will protect you." Torres read the words, his own confession staring back at him in cold black ink. It was the end of his life as he knew it, and the beginning of something new. With a hand that barely trembled, he took the pen and signed his name. The secret was out. The shadow had a voice, and that voice was now a weapon aimed not just at Derek Mason, but at the entire corrupt system that had protected him for so long. The news of Officer Torres's sworn statement traveled up the federal chain of command and back down to Maple Grove with the speed and impact of a missile. It didn't arrive as a rumor. It came in the form of a formal notification to Chief Brody's legal counsel. The U.S. Attorney's Office now had a cooperating witness from inside the MGPD. They had testimony detailing not only the incident with Marcus Williams, but also a pattern of abuse and a conspiracy to conceal evidence. The game had changed irrevocably. Grand jury subpoenas were being drafted. Chief Brody was no longer trying to manage a complaint. He was trying to stop his entire department from being indicted. Within 72 hours, the FBI executed the warrant. They arrived with technicians and federal marshals, seizing the central server and cataloging every file. What they found was damning. Dozens of deleted files, all body cam footage from Mason and 3 other officers in similar incidents, all intentionally erased. Derek Mason was suspended immediately, without pay. Chief Brody was placed under administrative investigation for obstruction. The police union, sensing the federal storm, quietly withdrew its support for Mason in what they called a case of clear policy violations. The walls were closing in. The blue wall hadn't just cracked, it was collapsing entirely, and Mason was standing alone in the rubble. Derek Mason sat in a cramped law office, his face ashen under the harsh fluorescent lights. His attorney, a tired-looking public defender named Kowalski, sat across from him, tapping a pen against the desk. "They have video," Kowalski said flatly. "They have an internal witness, and you drew your weapon on an FBI agent. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, Derek. You're looking at serious time." Mason's hands trembled. "But I didn't know he was FBI. I thought—" "You thought what?" Kowalski interrupted. "You thought a black man reading a newspaper on his own porch was suspicious? That's exactly the problem, Derek. That's what they're going to hammer in court." "I was doing my job," Mason protested weakly. "I was protecting the neighborhood." Kowalski leaned back, his expression grim. "From what? A man drinking coffee? The DA has your partner's testimony. Torres says you've done this before. Multiple times. They're building a pattern of racially motivated harassment." Mason felt the walls closing in. "What about the union? What about the chief? The union dropped you yesterday. Called it a clear departure from professional standards. The chief is facing his own obstruction charges. He's not going to protect you. Nobody is." The reality crashed over Mason like a wave. No union. No chief. No partners standing up for him. The blue wall had been his fortress for 17 years. Now it was a cage, and everyone had walked away, leaving him locked inside. "What are my options?" he asked, his voice hollow. Kowalski closed the file. "You can fight it and lose badly at trial, or you can take a plea deal, cooperate with the feds on department practices, and maybe, get the sentence reduced from 15 years to 8. Mason stared at the scarred surface of the desk. Either way, his life was over. The badge that had given him power, that had made him feel untouchable, was now the symbol of his downfall. He was alone. Chief Brody's press conference was the appetizer. The leak of the body cam footage was the main course, served up to a hungry and outraged public. It didn't come through official channels. An anonymous digital file was sent to a local investigative reporter known for his adversarial relationship with the police department. Within an hour, the video was the lead story on every news website in the state. By nightfall, it was a viral sensation, a trending topic on every social media platform. The video was more damning than any written report could ever be. It was a raw, unfiltered look into the heart of Derek Mason's prejudice. The camera pinned to Mason's chest lurched and swayed with his aggressive stride onto the pristine lawn. It captured the golden sunlight, the peaceful porch, and Marcus Williams, the very picture of calm, holding a newspaper. Then came the audio, Mason's voice dripping with contempt. "You live here?" Marcus's reply, calm and measured. The exchange escalated with terrifying speed. All of it initiated by Mason. The audience could feel his unwarranted rage building, his voice getting louder, more unhinged. They heard him demand ID. They heard Marcus's polite legal refusal. And then they saw it. The world tilted violently as Mason's hand reached down. The click of the unholstering was sickeningly clear. The gun appeared in the frame, a black specter of violence aimed directly at an unarmed man enjoying his Sunday morning. The camera's perspective made it visceral, putting the viewer directly behind the gun. They heard Torres's nervous plea. "Derek, what are you doing?" A lone voice of sanity ignored. They saw Marcus not flinching, not moving. His hands raised in a gesture of peace, even as his life was being threatened. The video ended as Mason backed away, but the damage was done. The public reaction was a tidal wave of fury. The technical glitch was exposed as the pathetic lie it was. Chief Brody's self-congratulatory performance was seen as a desperate act of self-preservation. The narrative was no longer controllable. It belonged to the court of public opinion, and the verdict was unanimous. Hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "Fire Derek Mason" exploded online. The comment sections of news articles were a torrent of rage. "This is not a bad apple. This is the whole damn orchard." He threatened to kill a man for being black in a nice neighborhood, and he's still getting paid. What about the partner? He saw it and did nothing. He's just as guilty. The pressure, which had been building behind closed doors, was now a public firestorm. The district attorney, a cautious politician named Peterson who was facing re-election, suddenly found his office flooded with calls and emails. Protesters began to gather on the steps of the courthouse, holding signs with Mason's face on them, demanding justice. Peterson had initially hoped the federal investigation would move slowly, perhaps ending in a quiet resignation or a civil settlement. He had no appetite for a high-profile, politically charged trial against a police officer. But the video changed everything. To not press charges now would be political suicide. The footage was the smoking gun, and it had been seen by millions. There was no room for ambiguity, no space for quiet deals. The court of public opinion had already convicted Derek Mason. The DA's office was now in a corner, forced to either ratify that verdict or be consumed by the public's wrath. The leak had turned a legal case into a public crusade. Marcus Williams, still maintaining his silence, watched it all unfold from his home. He hadn't wanted a media circus, but he knew its power. The glaring, unforgiving light of public scrutiny was now shining directly on the Maple Grove Police Department and the district attorney's office. And in that light, the shadows where corruption and injustice thrived could no longer hide. The decision came down from the district attorney's office swiftly. The public outcry, fueled by the irrefutable video, had left them no choice. A warrant was issued for the arrest of Officer Derek Mason. The charges were severe: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, official misconduct, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and filing a false report. The system, so often a shield for men like Mason, was now being forced to act as a sword. The arrest was calculated for maximum public effect. It wasn't done quietly at Mason's home or at the station. 2 detectives from the DA's own investigative unit, men who had no loyalty to the MGPD, were dispatched to arrest Mason at the end of his suspension hearing at police headquarters. He was leaving the chief's office, his face a mask of smug defiance, convinced he would get a slap on the wrist, a few weeks of paid leave. He believed the system would still protect its own. He walked out into the main hallway of the precinct, the same hallway where he had bragged about his exploits for years, and saw the 2 detectives waiting for him. "Derek Mason?" one of them asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Mason's expression faltered, replaced by confusion. "Yeah, what do you want?" "You're under arrest," the detective stated flatly, producing the warrant. Mason stared at the paper, then at their faces, his mind unable to process what was happening. "Arrest? For what? This is a joke." "It's no joke," the second detective said, stepping forward with a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click as he unlocked them echoed in the suddenly silent hallway. Other officers had stopped, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. The sight of a fellow officer, one of their own, about to be cuffed, was a violation of their tribal code. Mason's face contorted in a snarl. "You can't be serious. I'm a cop. You're not putting those on me." He took a step back, his hand instinctively moving toward his waist where his gun would normally be. That was a mistake. In an instant, the detectives moved in, their movements practiced and overwhelming. They spun him around, slammed him against the wall with a loud thud, and wrenched his arms behind his back. The handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists, the cold steel biting into his skin. The sound was definitive. It was the sound of a career ending, of a life being irrevocably changed. "You have the right to remain silent," one of the detectives began, reciting the Miranda rights in a monotone voice. Mason was no longer a feared officer. He was just another suspect, another link in the chain of the justice system. As he was led out of the precinct, past the stunned faces of his former colleagues, the bravado finally crumbled completely. The sneer was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, panicked terror. The cameras from the local news stations, tipped off about the arrest, were waiting outside. The flashbulbs erupted, capturing his humiliation for the world to see. The man who had pointed a gun with such arrogance was now a prisoner, his head bowed in shame. From a parked car across the street, Marcus Williams watched the scene unfold. He was an unseen observer, a ghost in the machine he had set in motion. He felt no joy, no triumph, just a grim, profound sense of finality. He had not sought revenge. He had sought accountability. The system had been twisted, forced, and exposed, and it had finally, grudgingly, done its job. The arrest of Derek Mason wasn't an end. It was a beginning. It was the moment the price of arrogance was finally called due, and the bill was being paid in cold, hard steel. The trial of Derek Mason was brief and brutal. The prosecution presented the body cam footage on a massive screen, the silent courtroom filled with the sound of Mason's unhinged rage. Officer Torres took the stand, recounting not only the porch incident, but the pattern of abuse that preceded it. His testimony was the final nail. Mason's lawyer tried to argue stress, a split-second misjudgment. But it was impossible to argue with the video. The jury saw a bully, not a hero. They saw malice, not a mistake. The deliberation was short. The verdict, when it came, was a foregone conclusion. Guilty on all counts. The judge spoke, his voice resonating with gravity. He spoke of betrayed public trust, of prejudice corrupting the badge, of terror inflicted upon a citizen in the sanctity of his own home. The sentence, 10 years in federal prison. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Marcus Williams sat in the back of the courtroom gallery during the sentencing. He wore a simple gray suit, blending in with the other spectators. He was not there as a witness or a victim, but as an observer of the system he had sworn to uphold. He watched as Derek Mason, stripped of his uniform and his pride, stood before the judge. The man's face was pale and slack, the arrogance long gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man who had lost everything. Mason's knees seemed to buckle as the marshals stepped forward to lead him away, his life as a free man over. Marcus watched him go, feeling not a flicker of satisfaction, only a profound and weary sense of justice served. It was not vengeance. It was a balancing of the scales. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. Marcus pushed through them without a word. One reporter managed to shout a question. "Agent Williams, how do you feel about the verdict?" Marcus stopped, turned. "This isn't about me," he said quietly. "This is about a system that needs to change." Then he walked away. 6 months later, the golden light of the Maple Grove sun once again spilled across Marcus Williams's porch. The wicker chair was in the same spot. A fresh mug of coffee sat beside it, steam rising in lazy spirals. The Sunday paper was spread across his lap. The world outside had moved on. Chief Brody had announced an early retirement, citing health reasons. The MGPD was undergoing a federally mandated reform program, complete with implicit bias training and a new civilian oversight board. Officer Jamie Torres, after resigning from the force, had been accepted into the FBI Academy. Marcus had written the letter of recommendation himself. Derek Mason was serving his sentence in a federal facility 3 states away. Whether he would emerge a changed man, Marcus didn't know. But the system had changed, even if just a little. Marcus picked up his newspaper. The silence of the morning was back, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of peace, hard-won and deeply appreciated. A neighbor walking her dog waved at him from the sidewalk. He waved back, a small smile on his face. He had been tested not in a dark alley or a foreign war zone, but on the front porch of his own home. He had faced a uniquely American brand of danger, one born of hatred and a uniform. He had responded not with violence, but with strategy, patience, and an unshakable faith in the mechanisms of justice. His fight had not been to destroy one man, but to force a flawed system to confront its own reflection. And sometimes a little change is a beginning. If you witnessed injustice, would you stay silent, or would you be Jamie Torres? Share this story if you believe in accountability.